If you got little kids, I'd say under 10, you may not, I don't know, they hear so much stuff anyway. They may not, but you got teenagers, probably something they want to listen to. We can get into a very tough subject here. Solomon's going to warn his son about getting involved with adultery and the adulteress. And there isn't anything more powerful next to the Bible probably than illicit sex. And so I'm going to talk about that, very plainly, and some of the dangers of having illicit sex and consequences. Solomon's going to warn his son here, not only here in chapter 5 as we're going to get started here, but it's going to be a continual subject for the next couple of chapters. He's not being redundant, but he wants to let his sons know, daughters know, young people know, everybody know how serious and destructive adultery and getting involved with an adulteress can be. Okay, now, it's a big problem today. I mean, it's so big now that people don't think anything of it. And but that doesn't change God's standard. God's standard for purity is still the same as it's been from the very beginning. Okay, let me share a little story first of all about what happened to one rancher. He was married, had a really nice ranch, good home, great family. And one day he came home from being out on the range and he noticed his wife was a little different. And so he kind of probed her and asked her. She really didn't want to talk about it, so he just kind of let it go. But her attitude and her response to him kept getting worse and worse and worse. Weeks went by, months went by. He kept asking her, "What's wrong? Tell me if there's something going on. If there's something I need to know." And she wouldn't tell him. Eventually, it caused friction in their marriage, and the kids were sick of it. They couldn't wait to get out of the house. And eventually, when they got old enough, they left. She started drinking every evening so she could go to sleep. And one night, she drank a little too much. And she blurted out what had happened. It just so happened this guy came by while he was out on the range. And at first, he was just kind of, nice to her, talking to her. And, he would just drop by on occasion. And eventually, she got to looking forward to his visits. And, one thing led to another. And eventually they ended up having an affair. And she committed adultery. And she told her husband. And he was just beside him, so he was floored. And so he asked her, who was it? Who did this? And she wouldn't tell him. So he just left the house. He went out on the range. He spent the whole night out there. And he came home and, she was still drinking. She was finally drunk. She finally told him who it was. It was his best friend. It was his best friend that came over and committed adultery with his wife. He was heartbroken. At the same time, he was angry. Angry at the years that it caused a conflict in his family, not only with his wife, but also with his children. And so he just went out on the range again. He stayed out there all night long. It was Sunday morning. Sunday morning, like every other Sunday morning, he got up and went to church. And as soon as he got to the door, guess who was there? It was his best friend with his hands stuck out wanting to shake his hands. I'll tell you what he did later. But there probably isn't a more powerful, destructive thing that can happen to a family than adultery. I know a lot of men and women that have had unbiblical divorces and they are currently living in adultery. You read about it all through the Bible. You read about what David did with Bathsheba. You read about the woman caught in adultery that Jesus ended up forgiving her for. You read about the woman at the well who was married 5 times and was currently living with somebody. Sex is not a taboo subject in the Bible. And, the Song of Solomon's all about that, But it's a very destructive force, or it can be a very beautiful thing, depending on the context. And so Solomon, the father, is going to warn his son very graphically about what he needs to look out for. So let me just read a little bit with you, then I'll make some commentary. Okay? So first of all, warning against adultery, chapter 5, verse 1. My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Listen well to the words of insight, that you may maintain discretion and your lips may preserve knowledge. Now he's going to describe the adulteress. He says, for the lips of an adulteress drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. For a young man that's not old and doesn't have a lot of experience, that kind of portrayal of a woman talking that way and looking that way may have a great, powerful appeal to him. Okay? You got this trend here a few years ago where women were blowing up silicone in their lips, sticking out their tongue on all their, selfies, making themselves to look seductive, putting a lot of makeup on, putting things I hate, I don't like, but that's my personal opinion. I don't like fake fingernails. I don't like fake eyelashes. I don't like fake anything on a woman. I think she's fine just the way she is, the way God made her. Okay? But that's my personal opinion. But a lot of women want to do that to be attractive to the opposite sex. And a lot of women today want to be attractive to the same sex. And so the father's warning the son, don't fall under this, appearance that she has. Okay? Don't listen to what she's saying when she's looking like that. Okay? She's in a very seductive place. And then he says to her, as a contrast, he says, for the lips of an adulteress drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end, my son, she is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. Now, the only other place the double-edged sword is used is in reference to the Bible. And so that's how powerful this can be, especially to a young boy or young man. And that's why I don't think there should be pornography allowed. They see that, they start thinking about that, and next thing you know, they get caught up in things that they don't have control over anymore, and get addicted to stuff like that. And she said, and then he says, her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the graves. She gives no thought to the way of life. Her paths are crooked, but she knows it not. An adulteress, a woman, they don't realize what they're doing. In fact, they tend to spiritualize sometimes. We're going to read later on in Proverbs how they go about doing that. And they don't really think what they're doing is bad. Now they're going to blame somebody, and it isn't going to be themselves. And he's warning the son not to get involved with her because her end is not good. She may have a young body at the moment, but her body's going to get old and ragged. It's going to get loose, and it's going to get saggy before she knows it. I just happened to have met many years ago when I was working in Palm Springs, California. I met the leading woman in the world that was famous for doing striptease. Now, it wasn't in a bar or anything like that. I actually met her in a hotel. I was a bellman, and I had to show her to her room. And she was, by the time I did that, she was in her 80s. And she didn't look anything like she used to look. And but she gave me a picture of her, how she used to look, and I thought, man, it was pretty interesting. So for a young fellow that hasn't had any kind of training or any kind of instruction from the father about the opposite sex and how alluring that can be very tempting. Okay, so the father is warning the son the consequences of getting involved with an adulterous woman. And so then he says in verse 7, "Now then, my sons, listen to me, and do not turn aside from what I say. Keep to a path far from her." Don't go close. Just stay away from it. "Do not go near the door of her house, lest you give your strength to others and your years to one who is cruel. Lest strangers feast on your wealth and your toil enrich another man's house. At the end of your life you will groan. When your flesh and body are spent, you will say, 'How I hated discipline, how my heart spurned correction. I would not obey my teachers or listen to my instructors. I come to the brink of utter ruin in the midst of the whole assembly.'" He lost his health. He lost his money. He lost his reputation. Everything that's honorable, he lost, because he let himself get involved with an adulterous woman. You know, that's pretty serious damage, isn't it? He's not talking about something that is easily recovered from. And I'll talk about that, I don't know today, but in a later video. Okay, and so he gives them this solution. You know, some of the people, they get involved in adultery because of this. They have pain. And then they go to pleasure. And they go back to pain. And it becomes a cycle of pain, pleasure, pain, pleasure, pain, pleasure. And this is not what God wants at all. Okay? And it's not that God is trying to keep you from something good. He's trying to protect you so that he can give you something good at the right time with the right person. And that's what the father's going to tell the son now. He said this, "Drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well." He's talking about his own wife. Okay? Don't go, you know, slob over with somebody else's wife, you know, or get any pleasure from her. You know, and then he gives his rationale. "Should your springs overflow in the streets? Your streams of water in the public squares? You know, why would you do that?" And then he says, "Let them be yours alone, never to be shared with strangers." You know, you got all these people that are involved in swinging, and they share their wives and husbands. You know, and God is saying that the marriage bed should be undefiled, and that you should not do that. Okay? And he said, "Why you want to share your wife with somebody else?" And that's not a good thing to do. He says, "May your fountain be blessed." Now he's speaking of his wife. "And may you rejoice in the wife of your youth. A loving doe, a graceful deer, may her breast satisfy you always, and may you ever be captivated by her love." And he's contrasting now what it would be like to be with an adulteress, which basically is lust. It's not love. And, you know, having physical intimacy with a woman who you don't love is nothing more than that, lust. It's sex without any commitment. But when you have intimacy with your wife whom you really love, that's a whole different thing. Okay? It doesn't compare. And then he says, "Why be captivated, my son, by an adulteress? Why embrace the bosom of another man's wife? And then he says this, to kind of close it all off. Yeah, a lot of people, they do this stuff and they think they're hiding. And they're going to get away with it. And that nobody sees. You know, let me tell you, you get found out soon enough. But there's one person you can't hide it from, and that's God. And he says this, for a man's ways are in full view of the Lord, and he examines all his paths. Man, you start flirting around with that sort of stuff, and you get on that path, God is seeing it. And he says, the evil deeds of a wicked man will ensnare him. The cords of his sin hold him fast. He will die for lack of discipline, led astray by his own great folly. Okay. Let's say you've been caught in adultery, or you've been an adulteress. Is there forgiveness? Absolutely. Jesus forgave the woman. But there's consequences. The consequences vary, like they say, like Solomon talked about here. You know, but probably the greatest consequence you're going to have is a memory. Not only that memory, but the emotional damage of being with someone that you shouldn't have been with. Okay? Can you imagine you're with somebody else's wife, and this is a person that you're never going to be married to? Or she, in fact, has sex with somebody who he ends up marrying somebody else. You know, the whole thing creates an emotional quagmire that is damaging all the way around. People are on drugs and drinking because of this stuff. People have committed suicide and murder because of this, you know. Now, God's ideal, his ideal, one man, one woman, to become together as one. That's his ideal. That's his original blueprint. Sometimes that blueprint gets marred, in which case the ideal turns into an ordeal, and now you're about ready to a new deal. Before you run off on your husband, or you run off on your wife, you better make real sure that you're on the right path. Because if not, you're going to end up in a really bad place, as Solomon says here. Now, Solomon's going to talk more about this. He's going to go in greater detail because there's a lot more pitfalls that get involved here. And my suggestion is don't entertain the thoughts. Don't put it before your eyes. If someone is flirting with you that shouldn't be, cut it off with them right away. I do on Facebook. I have people say things to me all the time. I cut them off right away. And I try to be as professional as I can while I'm on here. And you just don't entertain any of that. And so let me just close with this. That rancher had to think for a minute about what this guy did to his wife and his family, and he had his hands outstretched. What do you think he did? What would you do at that moment? You know, did you put a bullet between his eyes? You know, slit his throat? You know what he did? The true story. He put out his hands. He shook that man's hand and he forgave him. And that was the starting point for the healing of his marriage. It took a while, but it helped. And I've rescued marriages before like that, where we've had to take some drastic action. And, you know, so there's some redemption here, but it's a very serious warning from Solomon. You young people, if you listen to this, you stay away from that. I don't care what the TV and what, you know, Hollywood says and what all your friends are saying. Not everybody's doing it. And I'll talk more about that later on. Okay, y'all have a good evening. God bless y'all.